Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am very excited to introduce our three speakers, Dr. Sarah Espinoza, Dr. Laura Hooper, and Dr. Katie Miller. Dr. Espinoza is an assistant professor in our Division of General Pediatrics and Adolescent Health, DOGPA. She completed a master's degree in kinesiology at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and a doctoral degree in kinesiology here at the University of Minnesota. Specifically, her graduate training was in developmental sport and exercise psychology, which uses a developmental psychological approach to understanding and improving young people's physical activity and well-being. We are very fortunate that Dr. Espinoza then joined DOGPA, where she completed her postdoctoral fellowship in child and adolescent primary care research, and then joined our faculty this past July. She is a CTSI Medical School Early Career Research Award, ECRA Scholar. And as a researcher, Dr. Espinoza is enthusiastic about projects that emphasize solutions to address challenges in pediatric physical activity. Outside of work, she enjoys being physically active, including spending time volunteering with youth programs like Girls on the Run. Dr. Laura Hooper is a T32 fellow in the Midwest Regional Postdoctoral Training Program in Eating Disorders Research here at the U of M. She completed her training as a registered dietitian and earned a master's in nutritional sciences from the University of Washington, where she also worked for 10 years as a clinical pediatric dietitian in the Division of Adolescent Medicine at Seattle Children's Hospital. Lucky for us, she then moved to the Twin Cities, where she completed a PhD in nutrition with a doctoral minor in epidemiology from the U of M. During her doctoral training, she also completed our interdisciplinary fellowship in adolescent health in DOGPA. Dr. Hooper's research focuses on improving health outcomes and decreasing inequities related to disordered eating, nutrition, and physical activity in diverse populations of adolescents and young adults. Her current work aims to partner with patients, families, and healthcare professionals to decrease weight stigma conveyed to patients in healthcare settings. And Dr. Katie Miller is a pediatrician and adolescent medicine specialist. She completed medical school at the University of Iowa and her pediatric residency at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, followed by a year as the Global Health Pediatric Chief Resident there. We were thrilled that she then came here to the University of Minnesota, where she completed her fellowship in adolescent medicine in our division. Perhaps you're catching on by now here how and where these three exceptional health professionals from different complementary disciplines met. Dr. Miller is currently the medical director of adolescent medicine at Children's Minnesota, where she also works in the gender health program, and she's an assistant professor in our department in DOGPA. She is passionate about providing trauma-informed care for adolescents and implementing principles of reproductive justice and health equity in her work. She is a strong advocate for physical activity that meets adolescents where they are at and providing weight-neutral, high-quality care for all patients. In fact, you may have heard or seen her quoted recently in the news, including in the New York Times and the BBC News, lending her expertise on this topic following release of an AAP guideline. So today our speakers will share some of their expertise and exciting work in their presentation, Move and Thrive, the pediatrician's role in supporting physical activity. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Iris, and good morning. Thank you for everyone for being with us. I'm excited to talk with you about physical activity. We all are, because it's critical to the health of all young people. And physical activity is also a complex social process, not just this dry, like quantitative thing, which is why we want to talk with you about it today. So I'm going to get us started with some of these early learning objectives. We want to share with you why physical activity matters so much for young people, tell you about some ways to discuss activity with your patients, and help you understand how teens in particular face some difficulties in physical activity. And we would like you to leave today feeling confident bringing up physical activity in your clinical work. So I'll start by covering some of the basics of physical activity. And when it comes to intensities of aerobic physical activity, or that which requires oxygen for generating energy, there are three main types. There's light intensity physical activity, which is expending a little more energy than you might do when you're totally at rest and seated. When you're doing light intensity, you can still talk, laugh, sing without feeling winded. So this might be something like casually playing on a playground or maybe an easy walk. There's also moderate intensity physical activity, which is a little bit more demanding, but you can still carry on a conversation. You can see that these girls in the moderate activity picture are at a walk/jog, and they're still smiling, even though they're at a little bit of a more demanding pace than light intensity activity. And then we have vigorous activity, which is when you are pushing hard enough that talking is challenging. Like this person that's swimming pretty toughly here, like you're running, you're pedaling a bike fast, hiking up a hill, that kind of thing is more intense activity. So now that we've covered some physical activity intensities, let's talk about how much of what type young people need. And these recommendations come from the scientific report put out by the Physical Activity Guidelines Committee under the US Department of Health and Human Services. So they recommend that young people who are 3 to 5 years old get a total of 3 hours of a combination of intensities of physical activity every day. For kids this young, that can come from play. If you think of a small child, they do lots of different intensities of physical activity intermittently when they're playing. So play is most of this 3 hours, but active transportation or going from place to place, from daycare to home, et cetera, or helping with chores at home could also contribute to their total 3 hours of physical activity every day. Recommendations for daily physical activity are different for older kids. So for young people who are 6 to 17 years old, they need an hour of moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity every single day, the kind that gets your heart rate up and makes it a little or more difficult to have a conversation while you're doing it. Young people 6 to 17 years old also need to be doing bone and muscle strengthening exercises 3 days per week. These can take many forms. It could be something like lifting weights with appropriate adult supervision or instruction as needed. It could be climbing, jump roping, weight-bearing activities like skiing or snowboarding or tumbling or gymnastics. There's lots of different types of things that sort of combine bone and muscle strengthening. And while this physical activity amount is recommended, Katie, Laura, and I would encourage you to keep in mind that some is better than none and more is typically better than less, right? So this is a guideline, a recommendation for sure, but we want to acknowledge and praise any physical activity that the young people that you're seeing are currently doing. So we've covered some recommended amounts, and let's look at how physical activity contributes to health at different points in development. So in the letter to the Surgeon General that the Scientific Guidelines Committee wrote when they're summing up their physical activity findings, they sum them up in these three ways, right? First, that across the entire lifespan, physical activity provides benefits that help us just feel better and sleep better and get through our days with more energy and more easily. They also summed up the benefits of physical activity by talking about how even a single bout, like a single session of physical activity, can have benefits for an individual, right? One bout of that moderate to vigorous physical intensity can improve sleep that same night, reduce anxiety symptoms that same day, boost cognition right after you're done, reduce blood pressure, lots of immediate benefits. But improvements and benefits to health seem to get even bigger when we're regularly physically active. So this is just the way that they summed up the findings overall. And I'll talk about a couple of health benefits in specific areas that might be relevant to you and your patients. So one area where we consistently see health benefits of physical activity for young people is in cardiorespiratory fitness. When young people participate in regular physical activity, they improve their cardiorespiratory fitness, different aspects of cardiorespiratory fitness, like stroke volume and heart function. And when you have improved cardiorespiratory fitness, you're better able to participate in more physical activities, right? That's why I have this sort of cycle image on this slide. We're physically active, which helps contribute to our cardiorespiratory fitness, and having higher cardiorespiratory fitness in turn contributes to our ability to be physically active. There are some short-term and long-term benefits in other areas like cardiorespiratory fitness or cardiometabolic health from physical activity. So for short-term benefits, young people have improved plasma insulin, cholesterol, and blood pressure, even from pretty brief periods of physical activity. And there's also pretty interesting evidence, which is described in the AHA clinical report that came out in 2020, that higher cardiorespiratory fitness in adolescents protects people into middle adulthood, right? So when young people have higher cardiorespiratory fitness, by the time they're in their 40s, we see that they have decreased risk of all-cause mortality, decreased risk of heart attack, decreased risk of stroke. And so physical activity and cardiorespiratory fitness in adolescents can contribute to cardiorespiratory health in the long term. I'd also like to talk about some of the short and long-term benefits of physical activity to multiple areas of cognition or cognitive function. So randomized controlled trials of activity bouts, or like even single or short-term activity interventions, have really contributed in this area because we can easily manipulate them, say, compared to overall physical activity that somebody does, outside of a study condition. And so randomized controlled trials have demonstrated that physical activity sessions causally seem to improve attention, improve different types of executive function, improve memory, and improve processing speed. And I just want to point out one interesting study here. It came out in Pediatric Exercise Science 20 years ago, so it's older, but it's important for a couple of different reasons. So this meta-analysis combined about 50 studies and 125 different effect sizes to conclude that there's an overall significant and medium effect size of 0.32 of physical activity on cognition in children and adolescents, which is pretty meaningful finding. It was one of the first syntheses of research in this area, and it was also important, and this is really a big takeaway, because this meta-analysis demonstrated that the benefits of physical activity on cognition occur in both neurotypical children as well as kids who have neurodevelopmental conditions like ADHD. And other researchers since have really pursued the benefits of physical activity for kids with all types of neurodevelopmental conditions. So that's why this study was important. But truly, the benefits of physical activity on cognition seem to be there for all populations of young people. Relatedly, physical activity has meaningful protective effects for mental health, particularly for teens. Research consistently yields significant and sizable effects of physical activity on mental health in a positive way. And study after study, we see that higher physical activity levels decrease a young person's risk of ever experiencing depression, decreasing the severity of their depressive symptoms, and lowering their levels of anxiety and of distress. We've got these great examples of how physical activity contributes to health, but there are these other more like socially embedded ways that physical activity contributes to development. Physical activity is a context or a series of contexts where young people can build ideas about what they're capable of. And they, through these unstructured activities like skateboarding with a parent, or through structured activities like sport, young people learn, they evaluate their skills and their abilities. And so when young people have a chance to master new physical skills, like a new skateboard trick, they build their perceived competence and they're sent positive feedback about themselves that they're capable of doing something. And this increases both self-esteem and maintains motivation to come back and participate in physical activity. Physical activity is also a key vehicle for young people to develop social relationships and find and be with friends and build a sense of belonging with other young people. And it's a place where they can build healthy relationships with adults in the community, like sport coaches. All of this comes with the caveat that the physical activity environment needs to be psychologically safe, right? Coaches need to reinforce kids' positive beliefs about themselves rather than cut them down or put them in harm's way. But I'm sure you can think back to your own positive sport experiences and recognize the potential of physical activity and social relationships, like a good coach, to change a young person's life. I'm sure you're thinking, Sarah, this sounds great. Physical activity just isn't that easy for the patients that I work with. Many of you work with pediatric populations with difficult medical situations, but across conditions, physical activity really benefits young people in therapeutic and preventative ways. I just want to share one example of young people with asthma participating in physical activity. So researchers at the University of Michigan ran this study called Project Impact to understand if kids with asthma could safely and regularly participate in physical activity in a real world context in the classroom. And so teachers offered 5 to 15-minute activity breaks for 20 weeks to break up, like activity breaks that just broke up the school day in the classroom. And so it turned out that students with asthma actually participated in the physical activity more often than students who didn't have asthma, and that those with asthma participated at higher intensities or more vigorous activity than those who didn't have asthma. They got really into these activity breaks. And after the intervention, students with asthma reported being more confident in their ability to be physically active and more confident gains in confidence that were bigger compared to their peers without asthma. Students had only a few bouts of coughing that were observed over these 200 or so activity sessions, and these self-resolved within 5 to 15 minutes. Students didn't experience exercise-induced bronchoconstriction, and they had their inhalers with them in the classroom per school policy, but the study really expanded the literature to show that being physically active was possible in this real world context and safe for kids with asthma. And it expanded on research that had already shown that being physically active can reduce asthma symptom severity over time. So just keep this in mind when you're seeing young people with asthma when they come into clinic. I just want to briefly touch on the experiences of children and adolescents with cancer. They often want to be physically active when they're on therapy, and when they're off, they experience higher quality of life and retain some of their muscle strength when they're more physically active compared to not. But they need your support to do so. Young people with cancer say sometimes that, my doctor never told me I should be active, so I'm not, or I didn't know if it was safe. And if you can work with care teams to help get physical activity to your patients with cancer, they're very likely to participate. Okay, I want to wrap up with 2 different examples of questions that you could use to make physical activity a priority in your clinics through assessment and documentation. These come from the AAP guidelines from 2020 and their clinical report actually on physical activity assessment. So one question that you could use is this one from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which asked during the past 7 days, how many days were you physically active for at least 60 minutes, add up all the time you spent in different types of activity that raised your heart rate. And so the advantages of incorporating this question into a screener or an EHR are that it's just one question, it has decent reliability, and it maps directly onto MVPA guidelines, but clearly it's a little more tailored for older kids and adolescents, and it doesn't capture muscle and bone strengthening activities. Another question or a series of questions you could use for documenting young people's physical activity in clinic is this series of Intermountain Healthcare Pediatric Physical Activity Vital Sign questions. So it's 4 items asking about weekly physical activity, activities during a typical week, screen time. And then it sums up by asking, is physical activity an area you want to work on with your family? And this is for parents. So if a parent checks yes, that could be a great way to start conversations in clinic about physical activity. If you need any help finding items that work for your clinical assessments on physical activity, just let us know. But with that, I want to turn to Laura, who's going to talk about some of the things we've seen specifically for physical activity for adolescents, and how we're trying to combat the issues that are stopping them from being active.
Thank you, Sarah. So Move and Thrive is a strengths-based, youth-engaged video library on YouTube designed to reach adolescents who are diverse in fitness level, race, ethnicity, body size, gender identity, and socioeconomic status. And in the summer of 2020, the three of us, Sarah, Katie, and I, were all trainees in the interdisciplinary fellowship in the Division of General Pediatrics and Adolescent Health here at the University of Minnesota. And we came together to develop this resource. Katie and I, as clinicians, realized that we had both encountered a similar issue in our adolescent clinical care. So I'll talk about my experience. So as a registered dietitian, I worked with many adolescents with accelerated weight gain, hyperlipidemia, insulin resistance, and other weight-related health conditions. And as I got to know my patients and hear about what their goals were to support their health, one of the goals I heard most commonly was that they were actually very motivated to become more physically active. Next slide, please. But for many of my patients, were just not able to pursue this goal for a variety of reasons. So they had encountered barriers such as expensive fees for organized activities like team sports and dance classes. Others didn't have time because they were caring for younger siblings after school or working an extra job to support their family financially. Some young people lived in neighborhoods that were not safe to walk or play in. And then for some of my patients, they did have fitness resources available to them, but those resources were too challenging for someone who was just getting started with physical activity. So for these reasons, and also because the the adolescents were interested in online fitness resources, I found myself really wanting to refer patients to free online fitness resources. But then when I went to look for these resources, everything I found seemed to promote body dissatisfaction and/or disordered eating. Next slide, thanks. So this is what the top fitness influencers for adolescents look like in online platforms. As a whole, these influencers are super thin or hypermuscular. Most, but not all, are white, and they are nearly all typically able-bodied. They present themselves in hypersexualized ways, and most reinforce heterosexual norms. Their content is littered with ads, and they themselves try to sell products and memberships to young people. And perhaps worst of all, in reflecting their lack in understanding of adolescent development, they focus on appearance. They talk about changing their bodies to tone, sculpt, and tighten. And they talk about exercise as a way to compensate for overeating. Next slide. Our team loves and cares about adolescents from all backgrounds. And we know that adolescents are not being represented in their truest forms in mainstream online fitness culture. We also know that they deserve high quality and safe physical activity opportunities. And so at the time, we realized we had a tremendous opportunity to improve the online physical activity content and make it more health supporting, inclusive, and adolescent centered. Next slide. So that's how we came to create Move and Thrive. Our mission is to provide physical activity resources that are teen-friendly, fun, youth and community-driven, and representative of the diversity of young people. We partnered with paid fitness instructors to create a website, which is now a YouTube channel, with a free physical activity video library designed to promote physical and emotional well-being for adolescents using a weight-neutral approach. Next slide. Our work is youth and community driven. So throughout the development of this resource, we partnered with paid adult and youth advisory boards from the community. We aim to use the lens of positive youth development and cultural humility in this work. And our goal is to create this resource and conduct create this resource and conduct research that centers the voices and experiences of youth with identities that have historically been underrepresented in physical activity resources. So this resource is free, and we encourage you and welcome you to share it with your adolescent patients. And we've included our YouTube channel information here. All right, so our first research study focused on assessing adolescents' views of online physical activity video resources, and also focused on what adolescents want to see in these resources. Data collection and analyses are complete. Next slide. Our research questions were, what are adolescents' preferences regarding online physical activity videos? And how do adolescents respond to 2 Move and Thrive videos? In this qualitative research study, adolescents first participated in 2 pre-selected physical activity videos from our video library. And second, they participated in 1 60-minute focus group on Zoom. Participants' mean age was 16 and a half. They were ethnically and racially diverse, with 21% of participants identifying as white only. Also, about 60% of our participants identified as female. Next slide. For our qualitative analysis, an inductive analytical approach was used, and we organized the codes into 5 themes, including using online physical activity videos should be a social motivating experience, teen-specific considerations, teens desire professional video elements, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and polarized views regarding online yoga. Next slide. Adolescents wanted physical activity videos experiences to be highly social and motivating. For example, participants felt supported and motivated when instructors offered modifications to the exercise in ways that reinforced adolescents' autonomy and competence. Next, please. One participant said, I liked how he didn't frame it as, oh, here's the exercise, and then here's an easier version. He did it like, here's the exercise, and here's a harder version. If you chose the less difficult version, it doesn't feel like you're being lazy or something. But if you chose the harder version, it feels like you're challenging yourself. And I feel like that frames it in a more positive way. People won't feel like they have to do the harder one. Some of the themes in our data, such as teen-specific considerations, confirm that in fact, Move and Thrive has the potential to fill the gap that it was designed to fill. For example, when asked, what do you wish adults knew about how young people think about physical activity? One teen said, just one thing that comes up, and this is more on a serious note, I know there's a lot of stuff about exercise and your body image, and then videos are titled like lose belly fat, stuff like that. Stuff that could just be toxic, not very positive. I know that can be a really big struggle for people who have struggled with that. And that can be a really big barrier if they just don't have a good relationship with exercising because of that whole concept. Since we were asking adolescents about their preferences for online physical activity resources, we also asked them about their recommendations for how we should further develop our Move and Thrive resource. So this, regarding that question, this team went on to say, I just know making sure to title your videos, nothing to do with losing weight, especially if it's aimed towards teens, because I think that really shouldn't be something we should be focusing on, and just making sure that it's stuff like exercise. I think that we should be, especially as teenagers, just exercising to stay healthy and fit, and not in any way to try to lose weight or anything like that. Next slide. Another thing that became clear in our data was that involvement from the important adults in teens' lives mattered to them. Multiple teens told us that parents, physical education teachers, and sport or dance coaches had distributed videos to them during the pandemic, but they did not enjoy this, especially when adults didn't participate with them. Regarding an experience with a physical education teacher, one adolescent said, "I'd say especially if they're teaching it, they have to want to do it too. They have to show that attitude if they want us to want to do it. The reason she plays the videos is because she doesn't want to do them. She doesn't want to do yoga." Next. One teen described that when their usual physical activities were canceled due to COVID-19, their family members didn't seem to understand that it was difficult to substitute those activities with online videos. They said, "For me, I struggle with motivation. So sometimes, like one of my grandparents or something, they're like, 'I'm sure you could search up a video on YouTube.' I tell them, I'll be like, it's not the same as going and being with someone. They're like, no, you can just search it up on YouTube. It'll be fun. You can do it on there." Sometimes they don't understand that having someone actually there with you is more beneficial. When asked if they would like what they would like to see in our online Move and Thrive videos, teens shared many examples of production and editing practices that they desired, including high quality audio, video, lighting, and background setting. Teens had high expectations for these videos and wanted them to be highly professionalized. They discussed post-production editing practices that would make it more likely for teens to choose our videos while scrolling through social media. Examples included high-quality thumbnails or those video previews that you see. One teen said, "I think it's 100% good to have a professional thing because just everything. Just the way it looks, like how there's that quote, 'Don't judge a book by its cover.' I feel like a lot of people do that when they look at the thumbnail. If it's not a presentable thumbnail on the video, it's not going to get a lot of clicks and views. But if you have a very neat and organized, a clear quality image or something like that, it'll make people interested in it." All right, so teens also thought that online physical activity videos should be representative of instructors diverse in ethnicity, race, and body size. When compared to the homogeneous fitness programs and influencers that are currently available online and on social media, one teen said, for example, next slide, please. "It was good that they were people of color because I don't know if this is the right audience to say it to, but it really annoys me when this white dude with this stubble is trying to get me to do jumping jacks or something. Maybe it's just me. I just really like seeing people this is so cliche, but I really like seeing people I can relate to more leading me or guiding me through things." Next, please. Okay, and then this was another quote. "I like that she had a bigger body because I always see really skinny people doing exercise videos. It was good to see that because I know a lot of bigger people want to do exercise videos, but also it's annoying to see all these skinny people there. You always see big guys doing exercise videos. That's different from big women." So data from this study suggests that adolescents believe that there is a need for physical activity resources that promote emotional and physical well-being rather than weight loss, body sculpting, or muscle toning, are tailored to the needs of adolescents, use a positive youth development approach, prioritize diversity in creating a welcoming environment for adolescents of all backgrounds and identities. These results suggest that adolescent preferences for physical activity resources are in alignment with our mission at Move and Thrive, and we plan to use the data from this study to inform further development of this resource. Next, please. Our second Move and Thrive study focuses on teens' experiences of online fitness content and asks the research question, what are adolescents' perspectives, insights, and vulnerabilities to misleading information about exercise? During their searches for during their online searches for physical activity videos. We recruited adolescents who were 14 to 18 years old, could speak and read English, had the ability to use the share screen feature during a 45-minute one-on-one Zoom video. During a 45-minute one-on-one Zoom interview. So we've collected all of our data, we've done some preliminary analyses, and we have an abstract that has been accepted, and we'll be presenting that at the International Conference on Eating Disorders in June. Next, thanks. One of the preliminary themes in our data was ambivalence toward unrealistic claims. And this is related to the effects of exercise on body composition. Next slide. So for example, one teen said, even if fat burning would be a side effect that I might secretly be happy about, I'm self-aware enough that I wouldn't actively want to seek out that fat burning stuff because I know that I'd be playing into that toxic fat phobia culture. So as we complete our analyses, we're really excited to finish this study and complete our analyses, and we'll be also very excited to share our final results with you when the time comes. To wrap things up today, Katie will now talk about some concrete tips and strategies to help you promote physical activity in your clinical practice using a strengths-based, weight-neutral approach.
Thanks, Laura. So to wrap it up, we're going to spend the last 10 minutes or so just with some really concrete things that you can take away for clinical practice. So Sarah, if you want to go ahead with the next slide, I have 9 things that we'll go over. The first one is this idea of body neutrality. A lot of us have heard of body positivity, which is a different concept. So body neutrality is something that I think can be really helpful for teens and everybody who are trying to be more physically active. It's based on these principles of accepting your body in its current state. It's that your worth is not based on beauty standards, right? It's not my body is beautiful, which is a little bit more on the lines of body positivity, but it's, hey, my body can do things. So my body can take me places. My body can help me be with friends. My body can help me have a conversation with people I love. So appreciating what your body can do for you, and emphasizes caring for your body. So kind of that tenderness and gentleness that you might give towards another person that oftentimes is really hard to give towards ourselves. Next slide. So we often do get questions, well, why not just be body positive, right? There's been a lot of like media attention and kind of traction on social media about body positivity, which isn't bad, right? Like, so if someone is embracing body positivity, awesome, good for them. But I prefer body neutrality. So body positivity, an example would be, I feel good about myself because I know I'm beautiful. Whereas a body neutrality approach might look more like how I feel about myself does not depend on my appearance. As opposed to everybody is beautiful, even if it doesn't meet beauty standards, we can think more about the function and what our bodies help us do. So our bodies are just bodies. They help us do things we enjoy. So like a body positive approach might be, I love my legs, cellulite and all, they're beautiful, but the focus remains on appearance. With a body neutrality approach, you would think something like, I love my legs, they help me walk and run with my friends. So the focus shifts to the action, what our bodies can help do. Body positivity can be really challenging for a lot of folks. So if we think about, folks with chronic pain, people who have maybe a lot of body dissatisfaction or a struggling relationship with their appearance. I take care of trans kids. So trans kids, body positivity is a really hard thing to ask of my patients. Whereas body neutrality, you're kind of separating it out a little bit and focusing more on function and what you can do. So if you can incorporate some principles of body neutrality, I think that would be one great thing as we're thinking about how we frame physical activity and relationships with our bodies. The second key point is that when we talk about physical activity promotion, this is not a weight loss conversation. These are very distinct topics. And I think that tends to be confusing for a lot of people. There is good evidence that physical activity helps prevent weight gain and that it can help in maintenance after weight loss. It actually doesn't really contribute to weight loss. So this is not something that I would use as a weight loss tool. I completely separate these when I'm talking to adolescents. In fact, I won't even ask these questions sequentially. Like if I'm going through my heads or my shades exam with a teenager, eating and exercise are sometimes lumped together. I deliberately put something in between them to make them more neutral. So I'll say, tell me about, your relationship with food. Do you have any concerns about nutrition or how you're eating? And then I will talk about a totally different topic like sleep or activities. And then I'll talk about physical activity. What do you do for movement? What kinds of things do you like to do to move your body? Totally separate. So if we can divorce these two topics, you might find that teens are much more willing to talk about physical activity. It incorporates a lot less shame, right? Because this is a really fraught topic for a lot of people. A lot of teenagers, especially if we're thinking about maybe teenagers in larger bodies, they might have had really negative experiences with physical activity and exercise. So we want to be conscientious of that. So if you can separate conversations about physical activity promotion from weight loss, that does a huge service to your patients. Okay, I love this picture. So this is a guy named Martinez Evans, and he has the Instagram hashtag 300 pounds and running. And he is a professional runner. He runs for a living. He runs multiple marathons a year. And on his social media pages, he talks all the time about how he'll get like applauded from strangers when he's like out for a light jog, right? They'll be like, hey, good for you, man. Keep it up. Like this kind of condescending, like you're fat, but you're exercising. Good job. And I think it's a good example of how we tend to treat people based on their body size. Right. So I can think of plenty of examples for myself, right? If I have a teenager who has a quote unquote normal BMI, I might be a little bit less likely with my own biases to ask about physical activity, right? But physical activity is not something that we should only be prompting our patients in larger bodies about. And at the same time, we shouldn't be assuming that people in smaller bodies are active and people in larger bodies aren't. This is something I'm totally guilty of. I think to a certain extent, we probably all are. But ask what your patient is doing. I'm somebody who is in a larger body, and it is the big pet peeve in the world when a doctor tells me like, well, if you just start walking 5 minutes a day, and I'll be like, I exercise an hour a day. Like I'm training to hike the Grand Canyon rim to rim right now. It's super irritating. And our patients feel the same way. So ask what someone is already doing, because you might be surprised in what someone is or isn't doing. And at the same time, remember that physical activity is good for everyone, regardless of body size. So if we have patients who live in smaller bodies, in thin bodies, and they're not being physically active at all, that is just as much of an issue as someone in a larger body who's not being physically active. So ask what people are doing, don't assume, and ask with an open mind, because I'm often surprised when I find out what my patients are or not doing. So this is my favorite part of talking to teens about physical activity. So I love talking about reasons to be active that are unrelated to appearance or weight. And this is a really fun conversation to have with teenagers because they're really into it. Like they're really engaged in this and they like talking about it. So there are often 4 reasons that I'll cite. So the biggest one that I'll use with teenagers these days is supporting mental health. So if I have teenagers who are struggling with depression or anxiety, my dot phrase has like 6 things I ask about for those follow-up visits for med follow-up. Like one is like medication, how are you doing? How's mood anxieties, safety, side effects, sleep, and then physical activity. Like what are you doing for movement? And when I talk about teenagers with it, like when I talk with teenagers about this, I try to plant the seed of, hey, have you noticed how your mood changes after you've gone on a walk with a friend? Or, oh, when you went on that youth group trip for skiing, like, how did you feel at the end of it? And they're usually like, yeah, I felt pretty good, felt pretty relaxed. So if you can find an example, encourage them to think about that. So, hey, the next time you're feeling really down, maybe try, taking a 5-minute walk around the block or doing XYZ thing that you enjoy doing, and just notice, like, do you feel a little bit better after it? This is a little bit of a tricky conversation because you don't want to shame someone who's not physically active, right? Because depression affects motivation, which can affect your ability to get out the house, which can affect your self-esteem, which makes it harder to do something like go to the gym. So we never want to blame teenagers when they're not able to be physically active. And this is something I'll tell parents about, because I think there can be a lot of shaming of teenagers who are in an unmotivated, depressed place and are not physically active. But if there is a gentle way that they can try out some physical activity different from what they usually do, or in addition to what they usually do, that can be a great way to support mental health. Relatedly is relieving stress. So this is kind of some sample language. Sometimes when I'm feeling stressed, I just need to take a break and move around. Does that ever help you when you're feeling stressed or when you're stuck on a project or a paper? So like a 15-minute yoga break or a walk break, or, just do a couple laps around your living room, move your body, shake your body, dance to a song for 5 minutes. Those can be really helpful things for stress relief. So I'll talk to teenagers about that. And I'll try to get them to share an experience where they've had a similar experience. And if they can come up with something, then they're often, really motivated. And they're like, yeah, that did help. And it's one more tool in their toolbox that they can use. There's also a bunch of social elements, right? So being with family and friends. So like, I love taking my son to the park. What activities do you like doing with your family and friends? So the social aspects of being together with people, playing volleyball at the beach, whatever it might be, that can be really helpful for both parents and teenagers to talk about. So sometimes I'll encourage parents like, well, if you could go like on a family walk once a week, like it's just really good for everyone for bonding, to do something together, to get out of the house, assuming the weather somewhat cooperates. Those are nice things to do for family bonding. And then just holistic health in general. So sleep in particular. So if someone is really struggling with sleep, and I'm sure we all have patients, I've got a patient I saw yesterday, for example, who is really struggling with depression. She stays up all night. She goes to bed at 7 a.m. She hasn't been to school since September. We're working on getting her into a partial hospitalization program. But, we were talking yesterday. I was like, what if you went for a walk at like 2 or 3 p.m. when it's still light out, get some sunlight, be a little bit more active, along with the other things we're trying to do to address her sleep cycle. But this can really help with insomnia. You don't want to exercise too late in the evening because that can get your body a little bit more wired. But if you're going to do some physical activity before 6 or 7 p.m., that can really help with sleep. So that's another thing that I'll mention as a reason to be physically active. So none of these have to do with weight or appearance, but they're all very valid, very excellent reasons that teens can and should be physically active. And most importantly, these are things that teens care about. Like they all care about wanting to be able to sleep at night, being less anxious and less stressed, and they all want those social connections. So these are really fun conversations because teens are very, very into it. When we're talking about physical activity, especially for teenagers, it should be fun. So I had a patient recently who, was like asking kind of my neutral questions about like, do you have a way you like to move your body that feels like fun and enjoyable? And he was like, no, I have to walk on the treadmill 45 minutes a day and I hate it. And there were a couple curse words that I will not include in the grand rounds in that conversation. But that's a really good example of really caring, well-meaning parents who are really worried about their kid and gave him this assignment of walking on the treadmill for 45 minutes a day. And I think it was a bit misguided because now this kid hates it so much. He was like, I don't want to talk about anything. I don't want to do anything. I think it would be much more high yield to have an activity that's maybe shorter in duration and a little bit more enjoyable. Because something that's going to be enjoyable is going to be sustainable. And most of us don't love walking on a treadmill, right? Like it's not the most fun thing. I think if you've been exercising long enough and you have a good relationship with exercise where you can be like, oh, I'll feel better in 45 minutes if I just do this. Great, but that's a really different place than most teenagers are in. So finding something that's going to be fun and sustainable. So including friendships, including social components to it, making it shorter, whatever you need to do to make it something that's going to be fun. Walking the dog, if teenagers have dogs, make it for the dog, right? Most teenagers love their dogs and that can be like a service act too. And next slide. So I am just so supportive of anyone doing anything. This is kind of true for any conversation I have with teenagers, even just the slightest engagement or talking about it, being open to talking about it. I will praise. I want to give as much positive feedback as we can for small changes or what a teenager is already doing and build on a young person's accomplishments. So we talk about positive parenting a lot with younger kids. We don't tend to talk about it as much with older patients. Teenagers should still get positive parenting, and that can apply to the pediatric office too. So I tell parents for every negative comment your child hears, or for every constructive feedback comment, there should be 10 good comments. So for everything I tell a patient to work on, I am trying to think of as many things as possible about what they're doing well. So if they're not smoking or vaping, they get a high five and they roll their eyes at me a little bit, but they also smile. If they're not using marijuana, same thing. If they're walking to school, high five. And it seems silly, and they're often like literally rolling their eyes at me. But again, there are usually smiles too. So if someone has even thought about going to the gym, I get really excited for them. I support them. I think, oh my gosh, that's so exciting. What can I do to help you? Like, what would be the next step? So praising any engagement is really good. And I think Sarah did a great job at the beginning. Like an hour of physical activity a day is amazing. But if someone's not getting there, whatever they're getting, I want to be really supportive of. And you heard Laura talk a little bit about some of the issues with physical activity and some of the barriers. I try to be really humble when it comes to recommendations, and I miss the mark a lot. I'm sure I do. But keeping in mind some of the realities for our patients about what recommendations might not be feasible for them for a lot of ways, right? Like, if I have a patient who doesn't wear a swimsuit, right, that doesn't feel in line with either their religious beliefs or their body image, like swimming is not going to be something that might be the best pick for them, right? Especially like a co-ed swimming pool. If I have patients who live in an apartment, they can't do jumping jacks, right? The neighbors downstairs get mad. They need a small space. They don't have equipment. Just keep in mind that a lot of physical activity resources have a really high monetary cost too. So, I might not recommend hockey leagues, right? Like those tend to be kind of notoriously expensive. So just keeping in mind what is available to your patients and using principles of motivational interviewing to ask your patients what is feasible for them. So I have a lot of patients where, they don't have a gym membership. It's like, do you go to the mall? Like, can you walk at the mall? And they're usually like, yeah. So letting your patients lead the conversations about what will work for them in their lives and not making assumptions about resources or practices that may or may not be available or appropriate. And next slide. Along those lines, we have a list of a lot of available resources. You've heard about Move and Thrive, which is our online YouTube channel that's got videos really designed to be low barrier, right? So people of all sizes, people of all races and ethnic backgrounds making videos online, free, designed for small spaces and without equipment. The YMCA of the North is great. They often have free summer programs for kids in certain locations. The North Minneapolis YMCA does not allow youth memberships at current times, but others do. The YWCA has a lot of great programs. St. Paul has done the amazing move of eliminating all youth fees for their sports programs. And then they saw like hundreds of % increase in youth signing up for sports. So that really speaks to the barriers that a lot of kids have, like when signing up for these programs. But there is quite a bit available for free. We're happy to share this list. But this is just an example of certain resources that you could share. And then finally, we really want to walk the talk with this. So I did a scan of my work environment maybe about a year ago, and I was like, how are we doing? Like, what do our signs look like? And it was terrible, right? I had to take down a whole lot of like printed artwork. There was this poster that was like, if you eat an apple, walk for 20 minutes to walk it off. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is like the opposite message of what I am preaching. So take around your own environment, look how physical activity is portrayed, look at the resources that are available. Are the resources developmentally appropriate? Is the signage developmentally appropriate? Are there harmful stereotypes? And there absolutely were in my work environment. There probably still are that I'm missing because I'm human and I'm subject to my own biases. But does the messaging promote weight stigma? So just take a look at our own environments and at how we're acting in our own lives too, right? Like you heard Laura talk about how teenagers want the social aspect. They really want their parents involved. They want to go on a family walk. They want to go on a picnic. They might want to go on a hike. They really do value those connections, even if they roll their eyes and initially resist. So our own physical activity and how we treat physical activity and our bodies is really apparent for our teenage patients and children. So I think walking the walk ourselves and doing our best to incorporate these principles into our own lives is important. Those are our 9 things, which are a lot. If you pick one of these to work on, I think that would be fantastic. So the biggest one would probably be separating conversations about physical activity from weight if you had to pick one of these. But take what is helpful, leave the rest. I know that this is a fabulous group of pediatricians, so you're already doing many of these things. But those are a couple of concrete things that you can take both from our research and our experience in promoting physical activity for youth. And with that, I think we're happy to open it up to any questions. And thanks everybody for your time on a sunny February morning.
All right, thank you so much for that really outstanding talk. I just will briefly highlight what Brandy put in the chat, that our Twin Cities Pediatric Update is coming up next September. That is a joint educational conference between our University of Minnesota Department of Pediatrics and Children's Minnesota. And I would say this morning's talk is a great example of the awesome things that happen when Children's Minnesota and the university put on educational content together. So don't forget to register for that. We had somebody ask about EPIC dot phrases that help with physical activity screening. I can field that if you'd like me to, but certainly happy to hear what any of you have to say as well.
I use Cerner, so please go for it.
Yeah, so I'd say, Miranda, I don't know what health system you're working in, but in the mHealth Fairview system, the tablet questionnaires that people fill out for all of our preventive visits do have a physical activity question kind of buried in there amongst all the many other things. I do find a lot of fun information in there because parents will often say like, oh, they do tumbling or ninja gym or whatever. So it can be a nice way to start, as you were saying, Dr. Miller, like don't make assumptions about what people are doing to move their body, like hear from them. Let's see, Dr. Fox just, was thanking you for kind of pointing out the benefits of physical activity in terms of weight, but that's one part of working with someone who carries extra weight and not the whole approach. I do have a question, mostly for Dr. Espinoza, but any of you. I was curious about the distinction you were making between bone strengthening and muscle strengthening, and I need more education.
Yeah, so do I. And a lot of the good work in this area is actually coming out of the University of Minnesota. So I think their exercises, again, overlap. A lot of the weight-bearing activities can service both. But from what I understand, in terms of bone strengthening, the effects of physical activity on bone strength really seem, I think, to show up in size and formation versus like bone density or something like that for most like typically developing kids. And muscle strengthening, how do I even put this? It's just like building muscle strength. I don't know if Laura and Katie have things to add.
I think about the bone strengthening as opposed to muscle strengthening. Bone strengthening is something where there's a lot of weight bearing activity. So like walking could be bone strengthening, for example, because you've got that impact that's strengthening bones, whereas swimming wouldn't be. And the muscle strengthening is more like specifically strength based, like weightlifting might not necessarily help bones if there's not kind of that impact aspect of it. So if you think about like an e-gym, if you've ever done like an e-gym circuit, or like a really heavy machine situation, but you're not actually bearing weight. Like it's just like a biceps curl situation. Yep. Everyone I'm sure loved seeing my biceps just now. But I think of that as being specifically muscle strengthening, and the bone strengthening have some degree of impact because like walking, for example, or running is going to strengthen bones in a way that like swimming or just specifically muscle strengthening won't. Does that make sense and line up, Sarah, with your understanding too?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I also really liked what you were saying, Dr. Miller, about separating the conversation, like just the order that we talk about things to break that connection between exercise and weight, I think is so important. And I think all of us who do a lot of preventive care kind of get our rhythm to our visits. So if you can kind of build a rhythm that has a good order of operations, then we'll hardwire ourselves to do it in a more helpful way. So that was a really good tip.
Yeah, it's interesting how much some kids will shut down completely if they're coupled together. And like you know that face, right, where you lose them in the conversation. And if they're separated, I lose them less, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we are actually at time, and I always try to wrap us up right at 8:30, even though I feel like I could ask you questions all day. That was just a outstanding talk, and I love the way that you really brought the voice of our adolescent patients to the forefront, because I think we should be doing these things with them, not for them. So that was a really great approach, and can't wait to hear more about the stuff that you're working on. To all of our audience, have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will see you back here next week again for Grand Rounds. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.